Hello class. In this video we're going to take a look at two CSS layout models. First one's called Flexbox, second one's called a grid layout. The book makes it look very complicated and probably more so than it is. I'm going to try to simplify it for you and show you how you can use these to make a nice responsive UI design for your web pages. The main difference between the two, I would say, is that the Flexbox is used for a single row or column, whereas the grid is for a two-dimensional, fully featured, more complex website. Both have some similar properties that we can use to align elements inside the grids and the Flexbox to order the way your elements are going to appear. So let's start out with the Flexbox model first and see how that looks. So I've already launched our lab simulator, and I've cleared out some of the unessential stuff that we had in prior labs, and I've just left the body, an empty body statement here, and I have a reference to our style sheet, which should have right now nothing in it. And we're going to kind of model along what the textbook is doing, so we can have a video comparison of what is in the book and show some examples on how you can do with the Flexbox and the grid, and then you could try that out and practice along with it. As with everything in CSS, there are a lot of properties and a lot of different options for each of those properties, so you can really get very granular and very particular on how you want your web pages to look with some very easy settings. So just as a point of reference, the HTML design specification for the language itself was first introduced in 1989, so it's quite a while ago. CSS came out in the mid-90s, 1993, 1994. This Flexbox model was introduced in 2009. So you could see there was quite a bit of time between the initial creation and where we are now. So just think about how computers have evolved over time since the early 90s to the late 2000s and the 2010s. We didn't really have cell phones. We didn't really have mobile design. We really didn't have responsive design. We had everything on big computer monitors. So as the technology has changed, we have seen changes in the languages that we use to design web pages to keep in front of it and make sure that our current technologies work just as well as the older ones, and older web pages are now responsive and usable in just about any environment. Okay, so let's jump right into it. Starting in section 5.1 of our textbook, we see the definition of a Flexbox, and it says CSS layout mode that provides an efficient way to lay out elements in a container so that the elements behave predictably when the container is resized or viewed on different screens. Okay, so that just says that we're going to display our HTML elements in a single container, meaning a row or a column. And we could see here as we start our first participation activity, we have our three elements. Well, actually, let's run through this one. So we see our three elements. First, we have three HTML elements. We have three divs inside another div, and you can see it makes, as expected, three different entries on a page. No formatting, just three letters, the A, B, and C. So let's actually take this code and paste it over into our lab. We can actually shrink this back. We don't need this right now. And we don't need this yet either. Let's get rid of that. We just want the HTML. There we go. And we'll indent and keep it all nice and organized so it'll be easy to read later on. And the last div. And sure enough, if we run this code, start the web browser up, give us a little more room, and we'll see it list down here our A, B, and C. Exactly as we expected. We have three divs. We have three letters that are being displayed in order, one after another. Well, if we wanted to implement the Flexbox model, we could then build a container, either a row or a column, and store each of these individual elements inside that container, and then we could change the way it looks, whether it's justified left, justified right, spaced, centered, and lots of other items too. So let's look in the HTML now and the CSS and see how we can make this the Flexbox. So you see here in the second animation, here's our CSS. We have our ID and our ID rule container, where we enable the Flexbox by using this display flex. We're telling it to give it a border of 1 pixel, and it's green and it's solid, and the padding is going to be 5 pixels around the outside of the container. You can kind of see that between the green box and the div elements. So that defines the actual container itself. Now for the items, the flex items, so you have a flex box, which is the container, and the container contains items, so each of the individual items inside the container. So we see that we have the container and everything that's a child, every div that's a child of the container ID will get a padding of 10 and a 1 point blue solid outline. So let's see what that looks like when it runs. And there it is. So you could see that we have our flex items inside our container. In this case, it's a row. So let's copy our CSS into our lab, and we'll paste it into our CSS style sheet. And we'll get rid of this because we don't need it. And you can see how it generated. So we have our flex container on the outside in the green box, and you see it goes the entire width of the web page. And then we have our 3 flex items. And that is essentially how you set up a flex container. You give it the display flex, you set up the color parameters that you want, or not, and you set up your items. Let's make that a little better, there. And we set it up the way we want it to look. Now, in addition to all these initial setups, we have a lot of properties. So in this book, we see that we have a property, direction, and then we have the values, row, row reverse, column, column reverse. This defines how we want the flex items to appear in the flex container. This is our default in a row. Row reverse, we go, instead of left to right, we go from right to left. Column, and then column reverse is instead of top to bottom, bottom to top. Depending on what you're trying to do in your web page, these may or may not be helpful for you. Then we have the gap property, which defines a pixel size that you could put between each of the flex items. Pretty straightforward. We have a justify content property, which justifies the flex items with either the left or the right, or the center. So you can have a left justified, you can have right justified, or a center justified. Well, they don't call it flex left, they call it flex start. So start is start at the start of the container, end would be at the end of the container, and center would be right in the middle. You can also add spaces between each of your items. You could have the equal spacing around your items, and you can have space evenly, where everything is equidistant between each item. You also have a wrapping property, flex wrap, kind of like that Flex Seal guy on TV, but flex wrap. You have no wrap, which will just lay the items in, and they may not wrap properly. Then you have a wrap, which keeps them inside the flex container. And wrap reverse, well, that does the same thing but backwards. So you have the ability to, like I said, define whether you want a row or a column, whether you want that row or column reversed. You can identify spacing between, a gap between the items. You can justify whether you want things to start left, right, or center. You can define whether you want spaces between your items, and if you want your items to wrap inside the container. So with just a few simple properties, you really can make your web page look quite a bit different. So let's try a couple of these. Let's start out with the flex direction. And we can do flex direction. And let's see, which one do we want to try? Let's try row reverse. Row reverse, semicolon. And you can see our web page is rendered, and we have ABC starting at the right. Instead of row reverse, maybe we want to try column. Now we have column. And you could see by these quick and easy changes, the web page automatically regenerates, and you can immediately see the effect that you're having on it. Let's go back to row. Let's try, well, we could try gap, but I think we already have gap in there. No, we don't. We could put gap in there. 15px. Let's just pick a number at random. And we have a nice gap between them. We can try to justify. Let's use justify content center. See how that looks. And now we're in the center of the web page. And if I had resized this, we would see it shrink and expand. And then we have flex wrap, which allows us to wrap around the container if necessary. So a lot of this is this controlling the way items fit inside the container and the properties of the container, so we can decide how we want our elements or our flex items to appear. Well, we also have some item properties that control what the items themselves look like. And we have a few of them listed here: flex basics, flex basis, flex grow, and flex shrink. And their definitions are pretty wordy, but in essence, flex basis is the initial size of the item. Flex grow defines how an item can grow in size, and flex shrink defines how an item can shrink in size. So for flex basis, it sets the initial length of the item. The values can be automatic, auto, a percentage of the length, or a percentage of or the length of the unit. So let's take a look and see what that looks like. And we'll start with just a simple sizing of these items. We'll give it flex basis, and let's give it a rather big value so we can see the effect. Well, maybe that's too big. Let's try 100. Okay, so we can see it. So we have our flex basis of 100, and we could see each element outlined in the blue box is now 100 pixels wide. We can also try out the flex grow and flex shrink. And flex grow says how much of the available container space should be assigned to the item. The default is 0, meaning size should be based on the item's content. So let's see what that looks like. So also we should note that these grow and shrink properties affect how the items, flex items, appear when the window and the container size shrinks. So since we're going to move the window size left and right a little bit, we'll see some changes in there. So let's demonstrate. So before I do anything with the flex grow and this flex shrink, let's have a look at what this would look like if the window was resized. And the only way I can do that is by actually resizing my window. So I'm going to shrink it to the left, and you can see how the flex container is shrinking, and the flex items are staying their size until I can't go any smaller. Let's put it in with flex grow 1 after I reset the size. And flex grow 1 says that the item will fill up and grow to the size of the container. Now, if I go to shrink it, you'll see that the individual elements start to shrink themselves to fill and match the size. And when I expand back, they expand back to a normal size. So let's tinker with the flex shrink parameter. I'm going to make this a little bigger and make it a little easier to see. We'll make it 200. And if I do flex shrink 0, and we move the slider, we could see the container is shrinking, but the elements, the flex items, are not shrinking. And you can see now they've actually gone outside the container. So flex shrink 0 says do not shrink the items. Flex shrink 1 will have the opposite effect. They will shrink to match the size of the container. There you can see them shrinking and staying inside the container. Okay, let me line that back up. Good, okay. Okay, next we'll take a look at some shortcuts that the flex flex property has. And it allows you to specify, instead of specifying flex grow, flex shrink, and flex basis as 3 separate items, it gives you a flex property shorthand version that lets you specify it in such an order as 2 numbers, or actually three numbers, 0, 1, and auto. So you see I have flex grow 0, flex shrink 1, here's the 1, and flex basis auto. So you can now specify the actual size of the flex item itself in one single line. And you can see here in this example, we have a nav element, and its flex grow is 0, its flex shrink is 1, and its basis is 20%. So instead of being auto or a pixel size, we're using a percentage. So it's going to give us 20% of the size of the window, or of the container. The main tag, the main element, also flex grow 0, flex shrink 1, and 60%, so you can see it's wider. And aside, the final element is 0, 1, 20 also, same as nav. So you can specify the widths of the flex items as a percentage of the actual container as well. And here you see we have now a header and a footer, and 3 separate flex items. The header and footer themselves are not flex items. They are just regular HTML elements, and they can take the full width of the page. So again, flex items and flex boxes and flex containers, very good for organizing how you want your row or column of data to look. And you can really get into the nitty-gritty of how you want it to look based on all those different flex properties. And if you haven't already done so, give these practices a try. They're great for reinforcing what we just covered above. I'm also going to post a few links about Flexbox and grid layouts that I think will help at least give you another perspective on it, and maybe some clearer pictures to understand how it all plays together. And I'll have that in the resources section as well. And finally, I'll also post the link to this website in our resources section. It's a little game, a little interactive game you could use to practice your Flexbox layouts and properties, called Flexbox Froggy. Kind of a fun little thing. Try it out, try some of the properties, and you'll see how the different elements interact in a real-time environment by trying to move a frog onto a lily pad and whatever other little game activities they have. So give it a try, see how you make out with it. Again, I'll post that resource link in the resource section. Okay, so let's put the froggy away, deal with him later, and let's jump over into our grid layout. Again, grid is, instead of a one-dimensional, we now have a two-dimensional grid where we can specify a row and column structure. We can impose a row and column structure on our content. And instead of displaying a flex, we'll just be displaying a grid. We're going to be changing the display mode from flex to grid. So that will enable our layout, the grid container, and then we can specify the grid template columns. So we're going to specify the number of columns, and we can also specify the width for each column. So we can specify, in this example here, we have 4 columns. We have the first one is 50 pixels, the second 90, and the third and fourth are automatically sized to match the remainder of the grid. So we are defining the number of columns here. So if we run through this layout similar to what we did with the Flexbox, we see we start out with again, a div containing an ID, and the ID inside our div we have 6 more divs. So we can, as we expect, we'll see all these display in a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 structure. And why don't we build that out into our lab. Let me pause this for 1 second and save what I've been doing so we can have this as a reference. Okay, so I've gone in, I've copied it. I will post this into the resources section, so you have sample code. I've also cleaned out the style CSS so we can restart everything with a grid layout. So I'm going to start now again by copying this code, this div code. Of course, now it's being finicky. It won't let me copy it. All right, let me copy what I can and I'll type the rest. How about that? Div. And we need a div. Organize this up a little bit. Tabs, a couple more tabs. Oop, too many tabs. And we'll type in this div as well. And we'll give it a div here, an overall div. And what did we call it? We called it grid container. And we'll end that there. So we now have our 6 individual divs. We have a CSS ID for it called grid container. We don't have any CSS yet, so it's just displaying it as plain old HTML. So if we take our grid container, and we're just going to paste this in here, and we'll see the effect pretty quickly. And there it is. So here is our enabling of the grid layout. Here is our auto sizing of 3 columns. And what happens is for every flex item, for every grid item, it sequentially puts them into the grid. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Lays them all out. And we align the text into the center. You can also do the text align with the Flexbox as well, so you can have it more in the center. We set the background, we set the border, we set the padding, all this common stuff that we've done all these weeks already still applies. So we have our Flex Grid set up now, 3 auto columns. And if we wanted to change these, let's say we wanted to change them to different percentages, similar to how we saw in the Flexbox last example, we can change the values, and then we can adjust the sizes of the columns and make them different sizes based on percentages. But I'm going to put it back to auto for now. And we can see we have our auto size columns similar to how we have here in our participation example. And as we go through it, the 6 elements become a grid, and then we format each of the items. Great. Now, similar to the Flex items, we have our Flex properties, we have grid container properties, we have the gap, we have a rows property that can give us the height of the rows. We can actually specify different heights for rows. We have our justify, which is similar. We have a center. We have a stretch, which allows us to stretch the items to fill the container. We have space around, space between, space evenly. And we have our aligned contents if we want to put our contents in the top or the bottom or the center, or we want to stretch to fill it. So you can see there are a lot of different options on how you want your grid container, grid items to look inside the container. So tinker around with those. You can also control the placement of where things appear of a single grid item by giving it a row and column number. So unlike Excel or other programs where you label the column itself, like this would be column A, column B, column C in Excel, and this would be row 1, row 2, row 3 in Excel. We label the lines, the borders. So instead of 1, 2, 3, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 in columns and 1, 2, 3, 4 in rows. A little bit different, so just keep that in mind when you're trying to lay things out. And this will allow us to use some other grid item properties that'll allow us to place items in different sizes in different areas. So the grid row property lists the grid's items starting row and line number. The grid column property lists the ending column, starting ending columns. And the grid area, well, combines both of them. So we can adjust how we want the different grid items to look. So we're telling it in columns, not column C anymore, grid item C, we want it to take up these 4 grid items, essentially, and fill it up. So we can use these different values to adjust it. And here we're saying, if you look at here, grid item A is here. We're telling it to put it all the way down over here. Grid row 3 and 4. So if you look at 3, it's 1, 2, 3. 3 and 4. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Remember, we started at 1 at the top. So we're telling it to put it at grid row 1, 3, and 4. Item B, we're giving it a row and column. We're giving it column 3 and 4. 1, 2, 3, and 4. And we also said grid row 1 through 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So here is your B being placed in between 3 and 4 and 1 and 4. And then grid item C is telling us 1, 1, and then 4, 3. So here is our 1, 1, and then our 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 3. 1, 2, 3. So try this out, tinker around with it, see how you can move these items around. So it gives you control over where you want your different items in the grid to appear. They don't have to appear static in your default grid. You can move them around by giving them different spacing options. And lastly, similar to how we were able to specify the widths of the flex items to have percentages, you can do a similar thing with the grid templates, the grid item area, the grid template columns and rows. You can specify percentages and pixel sizes to get the different heights of the different rows. So definitely try out these different examples and you'll get a good feel on how you can resize and reorder your CSS in your grids. Okay, so let's try a little experiment. So we have our grid. Let's see if we can use the example code that we had earlier from the Flexbox, and let's put it in, let's see if we can put it in, replace item 5 with the Flexbox. So we're going to take out 5, and we're going to put in our div with the container. And there's our ABC, listing ABC as it should, because we don't have the styling that we had for the Flexbox. We took that out. So let's put that Flexbox in again, and we'll re-add the CSS. And now you can see you have a Flexbox inside a grid, and you can move things around now. So you can have one inside the other and really, really get powerful. Think of this perhaps as, instead of ABC, think of these as navigation links maybe to different areas of your web page. And maybe at some point you want to have one go back to the home or go to an email page or something else. But now you can simply just change the order of these and move them in the corners or to the tops and the bottoms just by changing the the grid and row template areas that we saw here. So you can easily move these little items around very quickly instead of having to write a whole bunch of HTML and move things around. You're not touching the HTML. You're just touching the CSS and where you want it to live. So very powerful. Again, try it out, tinker around with it, see what you can do, and we'll talk about some other properties in the next video. I will save all this code and post all the resources for you in the sample and the, in the content section, so you have these samples to tinker around with and try out. Okay, that's it for now, and we'll see you in the next one.